My name is Vlad. I live with my parents and my younger sister in an old 5-story building on the second floor. After the birth of Sophia, my sister, we decided to sell our old apartment and buy a new one, but we had maternity capital to the money from the old apartment. I was looking for an apartment because my parents worked hard to provide for the family. After a few days of searching, I got one good apartment, which was on the second floor of a 5-story building. But unlike our apartment, it was a new building. Having shown the ad to my parents, the general counsel decided to call and agree on what day we could see the apartment. My father called the number given in the ad. He was introduced to a nice, judging by the voice, girl, who explained that now is on the road, and if we want to see the apartment, we need to go to her neighbor on the floor, who lives across the street. My father agreed that we would come this Sunday, closer to 12 noon, and asked the girl to warn the neighbor about our visit. Vika, as this girl introduced herself, said that her neighbor and Tanya would be waiting for us that day. Finally Sunday came, we got up in the morning, had breakfast and gathered my sister, and went to see the apartment. To make it clearer, this apartment was perfect for us in terms of price. It was asked for exactly the amount that we would have from the sale of the old apartment and maternity capital. The apartment itself was in excellent condition, which was surprising for its low price. Having arrived at the address, we saw a fairly new 5-story building. There were no cars in the yard, as Vika, the owner of the apartment, said. Here live mostly pensioners, they have no cars, only sometimes relatives come to visit them. Having gone up to the second floor and ringing the doorbell of Vika's neighbor, we were opened by a nice old lady, who without giving a word to say in a quiet voice asked, "Are you the new tenants of my neighbor? Here are the keys. As soon as you finish the inspection of the apartment, put the keys in my mailbox, I'll take them later," and immediately closed the door in front of us. It seemed strange to me, her quiet and sweet voice sounded too naive, her face was too unnaturally kind. But deciding to put it down to her advanced age, I put these thoughts out of my mind. I want to specify that there were no lights on the floor, and the window, from which light could seep in, was taped up with several thick layers of newspaper. But why? It was the middle of summer now. What was the point of taping the window completely shut in the first place? While I was thinking about it, my parents opened the door and entered the apartment. I followed them and closed the door behind me. Out of habit, the apartment was pitch black. The light switch didn't work and there was no light in the hallway. Then my parents walked forward, went into the kitchen, as we would find out in a couple of seconds, and turned on the light there. A bright beam of light bulb illuminated the kitchen, part of the hallway. Everything really looked like in the photo, new renovation, new furniture, only apparently something wrong with the wiring, or the bulb burned out. When entering the apartment, we immediately saw a straight corridor in front of us. The kitchen was on the right side, almost at the very end of the corridor. There was another room in front of it, but the door to it was closed. On the left side was a separate shower room, a restroom, and a pantry. Opposite the front door, at the end of the hallway, was a hall. My parents were in the kitchen looking around. I felt uncomfortable in this one. The whole apartment looked so well maintained, although Vika said that no one had lived there for a long time. My sister suddenly shouted, "Look," and ran forward along the dark corridor, running into the hall. There was not a single ray of light in the hall. It was pitch black. Not knowing what to do, I followed my sister, but I was stopped by a sound. But wait, it wasn't a sound, it was a child's voice, my little sister's voice. It was coming from the bathroom. But how could that be? I saw with my own eyes as she ran into the hall. I go into the bathroom. There was no one there. A sink, a shower stall, a bathtub, and a voice, my sister's quiet voice whispering, "Help me." I start fidgeting around looking for where the sound is coming from. Finally I could make out that it was coming from underneath the bathtub, which was standing on some sort of high stand. I looked under it. There was a child sitting in a dark corner, but it wasn't my sister. It was a 2-year-old baby boy. I picked him up and walked out into the hallway. Vika never said a word about children. He couldn't have gotten here. The door was closed, and that grandmother never said a word about it, though maybe she forgot to tell us that her grandson was here. Why is he here alone, though? While I was thinking about it, I heard a chuckle in my head. I didn't know where it came from, but it was there. Then another one, and another. I held the baby so his head was next to mine. I carried the baby away from my breast. Oh my God, another laugh came from this baby, but his mouth didn't open. He was laughing with his mouth closed, and then he opened his mouth. I saw strange teeth that were pointed in some places. His eyes glittered in the darkness that was illuminated by the dim light from the kitchen. The creature asked in a rough, not at all childlike voice, "Have you come to feed me?" It turned its head to the side and bared its sharp teeth in a terrible smile. I started to panic, standing still, but I realized that I had to do something. The creature was not taking any action yet. I decided to take a chance, quickly flew into the bathroom, put the baby there, and jumped out as fast as I could, closing the door behind me. Only two thoughts were going through my head. I had to get my sister and parents and get out of here. Turning on the flashlight on my phone, I ran towards the hall to get my sister. Running past the kitchen, I shouted to my parents, "Let's get out of here." They were standing and looking at something in the window. I ran into the hall, lighting up the room with a flashlight. I saw my sister. She was standing there looking at a painting hanging on the wall that depicted some deity. He had the same glint in his eyes and fangs as the child I found. Taking my sister in my arms, I ran to the kitchen. When I got there, my parents were still standing there looking out the window. I shouted at them, saying, "Let's get out of here, quick." But they didn't react. Then I walked closer to them. God, they had no pupils, the weight of their eyes were completely white, covered in some kind of film. I jerked back and looked at my sister. Instead of my sister, in her clothes was the child I had found in the bathroom. I threw the creature on the floor and rushed out of the apartment. I was about to run outside, but I rang the doorbell of the old woman who had given us the keys. Maybe she would know what was going on. She opened the door and again, without saying a word, asked, "Have you come to feed me?" I flinched back and slammed the door in the old woman's face. When I turned back, I almost fainted. My parents, they stood in front of me and looked at me with their empty eyes. In their arms was the creature in the body of a child. They all started saying in one voice, "Have you come to feed us?" I don't remember how I managed to escape, how I ran out into the entrance and found myself already on the street, where there were many people. I couldn't catch my breath, my heart was beating wildly. I stood bent over, holding my heart. When I got up, I saw that all the passers-by were looking at me. They had no pupils, their empty eyes were looking in my direction, their mouths were open, and everywhere there was a chorus of voices that said only one thing, only one question: "Have you come to feed us?" I woke up, covered in sweat, my heart was pounding hard. Geez, it was just a dream, just a bad dream. Only we were really supposed to look at this apartment today. Okay, it was just a dream, nothing more. We arrived at the address. Dad said the landlady wasn't coming and handed the keys to her neighbor. He asked me to take the keys while they changed my sister, who got carsick on the road. I went up to the second floor, rang the doorbell whose number my father had told me. An old lady opened the door, her head turned on its side. She smiled sweetly with her sharp teeth and asked, "Come to feed me?" That question rumbled in my head. I turned around. My parents were standing there, looking at me with empty eyes and repeating the same question: "Have you come to feed us?" It all started with a change of apartment. Our family moved to a new apartment in a newly built neighborhood. When we moved in, the building was almost empty. Our apartment was a corner one, on the first floor. The first 6 months nothing unusual happened. I was only happy about the move. I liked the apartment very much. And it all started with rustling, clanking, etc. One evening, when everyone had already gone to bed, I distinctly heard shuffling footsteps from the corridor at the entrance to my room, and then a leisurely shuffling went back. But it could be written off as the stomping of neighbors from upstairs. If someone lived on the second floor, the nearest neighbors from upstairs lived on the third floor at that time. The next event happened later. I was coming home from school later than usual, at about 4 p.m., with a group of friends. I was about 700 meters away from home when my mother called me. The content of the conversation consisted of my mom calling the home phone, with someone picking up the receiver but not answering. She asked if I was home or if Dad was home. I replied that I wasn't home, and my dad wasn't home because his workday wasn't over yet. Even if he was home, I would have met him on the way home, but again, he wasn't home. All in all, I am shocked. Sharing the story with my friends, we rushed to my house. I opened the door, turned on the bathroom and toilet lights, looked around. But there were no people home, no signs of presence, everything in place. After that, there were rustles, creaks again. There was an occasion when we were having dinner, watching TV, and suddenly heard the sound of the front door opening. I was sent to check what was going on. The door was locked from the inside and could not open on its own. The next incident they told me about. I went home right after class to change my clothes and went back to school for extra classes. About 15 minutes after I left, a classmate calls me. She asked if I was home and if I could come out. I said I was at school, to which she replied that she was standing at my front door and heard someone yelling at my house. She said she didn't dare call the apartment, she thought I was being scolded. I was shocked. I told her there was no one home and there shouldn't be. About 5 minutes after this conversation, my best friend calls me. She lives in a neighboring building. She started telling the same story, said she met this classmate and suddenly interrupted her stories with a yell, "Your curtain just twitched." I was completely confused, there was no one home. I suppose it could have been sounds from the neighboring apartments. But our only neighbors on the wall on the first floor are pensioners. Anyway, I ran home, checked everything, everything's fine, everything's in place, there's no screaming. And, by the way, the girls could not describe the sounds they heard except for a man yelling. I didn't get any answers to my questions, what exactly they were yelling, how they were yelling. The apartment became alarming. Rustles, strange drafts. One day, my mother didn't feel well. I asked her how she slept, and she said that she didn't sleep at all, because it seemed to her that someone was looking at her. And the final incident in this story. I had to get up at 5 o'clock. I went to bed around 10 o'clock and fell asleep almost immediately. I slept with my head towards the exit of the room, the door was open. In the middle of the night I woke up abruptly and saw something wrapped from head to toe in something. No face, no arms, no legs, all in some kind of cloth. It was looking into the room, and when I saw it, it floated toward the exit of the apartment. I rushed to the other end of the couch, crawled into a corner, covered with a blanket, and prayed that I would fall asleep sooner. The house was quiet, everyone asleep. The last thing I heard were footsteps, as if someone had walked to the couch and slowly walked away. Before 5, I couldn't fall asleep again. After all that, no rustles frightened me, and I probably don't even notice all the clacking and footsteps.